Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. Um, just in you probably don't notice, but just in case you do, my eyes are a little puffy. I seem to have gotten something in my like tear ducts the other day, so I've been putting like hot compresses on them to try to get them to swell down. But yeah, I'm not exhausted. I haven't been crying incessantly, so don't don't panic. Everything's fine. Just the eyes are a little puffy today, so no need for concern. Um, let's see who's here. So Simran is here. Good morning, Simran. Hamad is here. Good morning, Hamad. Reza is here. Good morning, Reza. Sean is here. Good morning, Sean. Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. Um, Basil is here. Good morning, Basil. And Oasis is here. Good morning to you. So, yesterday, we were talking about. I guess we were kind of leading out of that article, right? And we were talking about the idea that these white male students in the class with female professors, women professors of color, they seem to have a certain dynamic, right? And we saw that white male students tended to challenge these women a lot more on their scholarly expertise and challenge their authority, challenge their teaching competency, and sometimes even go so far as to be kind of aggressive and threatening. And so the question I was kind of asking you is, well, why is that, right? Why do we see that pattern, right? Clearly, some people are jerks, right? We know we've all met. Good morning. We've all met jerks before. We know that some people are jerks. But here we see that it's only white male students that are kind of exhibiting this behavior, right? And so we could just say that all jerks are white males, but that's probably not true either, right? And so what's the explanation for this pattern, right? Why do we see it? And so I'd kind of suggested to you that there was a lot of social messaging that helped to convince white people and white males that their views, that their experience, that their way of seeing the world is in fact the most important one, or at least the correct one, right? The correct version of good morning, the correct version of reality, right? And so I gave you an example of popular television shows here in North America. And many of these shows are kind of a mostly white cast, or at least the white characters are the main characters, the central characters of the show. And yeah, most of these stories are kind of about white people, for white people, made by white people, right? And so, here in the West, there's very few kind of examples that we can point to that are, um, you know, very diverse or center around non-white characters. And certainly, the States um, has a few kind of shows that are focused around a primarily black cast, for instance. Um, but I mean, overall, I think it would be hard to point to too many shows that are super diverse, right? And so, Never Have I Ever, kind of, which is second season starts soon. Never Have I Ever kind of comes to mind. Um, Lots of people made a big deal about Crazy Rich Asians a couple years ago because it was basically an entirely Asian cast for the first time ever in North American cinema. Um, but yeah, we see a lot of stories about white people for white people, right? And so, again, nobody is really trying to get this message across, but the message that I think does come across is that, this is the default experience, right? This is, white people should be in the center of the spotlight all the time, right? And again, that's not true, but media might subconsciously convince us of that, right? We talked about this guy here, kind of famous, right? The guy doesn't even have social media, though. I don't know how he does it. Um, Kind of famous, but sorry. Kind of famous, right? But often, almost always, in fact, portrayed as a white man, right? And so here we have the Son of God, or God, depending on how you kind of think about it. the creator of the universe, the creator of everything, and yet portrayed as a white man, right? And again, not many people draw attention to that, right? We tend not to, you know, to impose race on God, right? God is kind of beyond that, right? He is all things, but it is very interesting to see him portrayed in this form, right? Because I guess in theory you could portray God any way you want, right? Because he is all things, he could be anything, right? And certainly, if we go to lots of other cultures, we'll see, God's portrayed as humans, or sometimes as animals, or sometimes as humans with animal heads, or sometimes, blue or green beings with multiple arms and things like that. Gods are portrayed in multiple ways, and so, it's worth asking the question: why do we like to think of God in this image, right? Or Jesus in this image? Why do we like to imagine him as a white person? Or who wants to imagine him as a white person? Because again, and I took that slide out, again, that's probably not what he would have looked like, right? He probably would have looked, a little more Middle Eastern, seeing as he was from the Middle East, right? Yeah, and so all of these kind of messages in television and in movies are kind of there to sort of subtly suggest that the white experience is the true one, right? The way that white people see the world is in fact correct or reality, right? And so it's very easy to kind of dismiss the viewpoints of other people who are, again, having slightly different experiences, right? Or think that different things are important. Yesterday we talked a little bit about the white savior narrative, right? So lots of, inspiring feel-good movies have this kind of plot where a white character, saves people of color, right? Sometimes, off, in the jungle somewhere, or, some other country. Sometimes it's at home, maybe in a rough neighborhood. Maybe the hero is a teacher. Maybe the hero is a single mother who adopts a child of color, and tries to keep him away from gang life or something like that. We've kind of seen those type of stories, right? Those type of ideas. And again, they kind of, they're stories for white people, and they kind of allow them to kind of feel good, right? Because the white person is the good guy, right? And again, people of color are kind of pushed to the edges. They're either passive, right, and they have no ability to kind of change their situation, or sometimes there's bad guys and good guys, like in Indiana Jones, but they're kind of, they don't really do any justice to people of color, right? The people of color are just a vehicle for the white person to save the day and, be heroic or learn something about themselves or whatever, right? So again, it's not to write these movies off entirely, but it is to say that, we should pay attention to how people are portrayed in film, because again, we absorb messages from that, right? And it's important to try to be aware of that. So I said to you yesterday that, white people are the dominant group in North America here, right? And so they have institutional power, right? They control most of the government and the criminal justice system and the media and et cetera, et cetera. They have historically been in power here in North America. They have social power, right? We saw that most media is actually made by and for white people, right? So white people have kind of firm control of society in North America. But there are white supremacists, so people who are strongly, how do we describe these people? Well, let's just say that they are very pro-white, and interestingly, they feel that white people or the white race are under attack, right? Somehow white people are, victims of whatever is going on in these countries. So it's probably worth looking at where this idea comes from, because again, it's, it seems backwards, right? It seems like, if one group has all the power, it seems strange that some of that group feels that they have none, right? And so what I'd like to do, and just with the first part of class here, I'm going to give you some time toward the end of class to do some project work, okay? So, but we won't do this for the whole class. But I do have a little bit of reading for you to do, and it talks about who these kind of white supremacists are, what they believe, kind of where they come from, and so we can, good morning, we can just talk a little bit about who these guys are that we see, marching and protesting and sometimes storming the Capitol, in the U.S. in January, right? So, so the reading is in Microsoft Teams as usual. Don't worry about number 7, okay? So you can skip number 7. That's, I don't know why I wrote that down. I'm kind of a music fan, so anytime I find anytime I find like an opportunity to talk about music, I throw it in there, but that's, never mind that question. So all the questions except for number 7. The reading is in Microsoft Teams. I'm gonna put 15 minutes on the clock here. Good morning. I'll put about 15 minutes on the clock, and then after that we'll just kind of see where we are, okay? So turn you loose to read. It is there, right? The article? Or are you just looking? Okay. Good morning. Yeah. White supremacy and overview, yes. So that's what we'll read. It's in Microsoft Teams, of course. Ryan, we're just reading this article in Microsoft Teams, okay? Okay, good people. I know you might be just reading the last little bit here, and that's okay. But maybe let's try to answer a few of these questions. So, I'm sorry to spring this on you first thing in the morning. White supremacy is that's a lot to deal with at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? Um, but let's look at this. So, what does the article say right at the beginning is one of the major causes of domestic terrorism and hate crimes in the U.S. today? It's what? It's white supremacy, right? Which is, I think, a very interesting statistic because I don't know what'll happen if I ask you this question because, of course, you're from various places in the globe. But if we asked most North Americans, what does a terrorist look like? The image that pops into their head is not going to be a white guy, right? They're probably going to picture a Middle Eastern guy, right? Maybe a beard, maybe some sort of head covering or turban, maybe a suicide bomber vest on him, and shouting, Islamic sayings like that. That's probably the stereotypical kind of terrorist that most North Americans would, even without trying, right? Even if I just said, think of a terrorist, that's the image that would pop into their mind. And yet, it's very interesting to look at the statistics here and see that actually, if you're looking for a terrorist inside the United States, you're not looking for someone named Muhammad, you're looking for someone who looks like me, right? Because white people have been engaged in domestic terror, as you can see here, for over 100 years, right? Up until the World Trade Center, I guess they're not bombings, they flew planes into them, I'm not sure how to, up until the 9/11 terror attacks in New York, the biggest terrorist attack in the US was perpetrated by a white guy, an American citizen. And I'll show you very quickly here. So it happened in Oklahoma City. I think it's 1995. I didn't look it up before, so my memory's a little rusty. A guy named Timothy McVeigh, who I have a picture of him here in a second, he was angry at the government. He's former U.S. military, was angry at the government because the government had recently stormed the property of a cult. There was like a cult operating in Texas, somewhere in Texas. And so the FBI had kind of stormed the cult because they were holding people hostage, or I forget what was going on. Anyway, Timothy McVeigh was upset with that, and so he decided to get his revenge on the federal government by bombing the Oklahoma City Federal Building. And so what he did, so with his army training, is he kind of rented a U-Haul full of ammonia and parked it in front of the Oklahoma City building and detonated it. And what happened was something to this effect. And so he took out, a pretty substantial chunk of this office building in the middle of a workday. And so, lots of people die, lots of people are injured. And again, I don't know if there he is. So again, this is, up until 9/11, this is the worst terror crime in the United States history, right? And in terms of killing the most people at once, you would say. And again, perpetrated by a white guy. So maybe we don't have to answer this question, but I think we can pretty clearly see how this might challenge people's idea of what terrorism is, right? Because I think in the West here, I don't know what you all think, but terrorism is kind of something that happens like over there, right? Like in the Middle East or something, right? That's where that happens, right? And it's the same thing as when we talked about sexism, right? We sort of we think of sexism as a problem of the marginalized or the developing world, right? Oh, they have sexism over there, they have oppression over here, but we're all good, right? And we said that, in fact, no, yes, there might be sexism over there, but there's also sexism right here, right? And just the same, yes, there's terrorism, quote unquote, over there, but there's also terrorism right here, right? But again, it's very interesting that we don't think of white terrorism quite the same, right? We imagine terrorism to be something that, other ethnicities engage in. But again, here you can see in the United States, white terrorism has a very long history, right? Going all the way back to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, right, in 1865. So if you know your American history, the Americans fight a civil war, right, because the northern states, among other things, but the northern states want to abolish slavery, make it illegal. The southern states say, no, we want to continue to keep our slaves to run our economy. They have a civil war, the North wins, and Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, right, which is slaves are now free. It is now illegal to own people in the United States. But as you read very quickly, an organization appears to ensure that Black Americans do not exercise those new rights, right? And those guys who you may have seen before are, get rid of this guy, are Ku Klux Klan, right, or the KKK. And so sometimes, have you ever seen these guys before? Or like images or seen them in movies? What's that? Where? Yeah? Good morning. Yeah, they're used very often in television and movies, but unfortunately they're not fictional. They're a real group, right? And again, they've been around since 1865, and they've used violence and intimidation in order to basically terrorize Black Americans, right? And so, why do you think they all wear hoods with a mask? What's that? To stay anonymous, yeah. Why do you think they're wanting to stay anonymous? Well, basically because they are committing crimes, right? So they would, they'll use vandalism, they'll use assault, they'll use harassment, they'll use murder, right? And the KKK has murdered people throughout the years. I have no statistics on how many, but again, it's it's pretty difficult to prosecute a murder if you don't know who did it, right? And so if you've got a bunch of these guys showing up in their robes and their uniforms and they all have a mask, pretty tough to know who to charge, right? And so again, good morning. Again, they are masked in order to make sure that they can't be charged for the crimes they commit, which again have been numerous, right? And so these guys have had times in history where they're stronger than they are today. There's footage, I don't have it. Hang on, maybe. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go. So here's the KKK marching right down in front of the U.S. Capitol, right? This is in the 1960s, right, when we have the civil rights movement. We have Martin Luther King pushing for civil rights and equality for all Americans, right, not just white Americans. And to kind of oppose that civil rights movement, we had these guys showing up to march as well, right? And here we have a bunch of white supremacists marching right down the street in front of the U.S. Capitol, right? And so they are, just one terrorist group, one white terrorist group that has existed has existed in the past, and again, still exists in the present. Again, they're not quite as powerful or as numerous as they used to be. You probably won't see anything like this ever again. At least I hope not. But again, they still exist, right? These guys are still around. So they talk about a few different types of terror organizations, right, or white supremacist organizations. There is there's KKK, and there's another one, and there's Christian identity, and there's National Socialist, and then there's neo-Nazis and skinheads, and there's kind of a collection of all of these kind of different groups. I wanted to ask you about, hang on. Okay, well, let's answer this question. What kind of views are held by the radical right? And so, before I ask you that question, did I ever show you the political spectrum in this class with people on the right and people on the left, or was that history? That was history? Okay. So the right and left is the political spectrum here, right? And so if you're in the middle of the political spectrum, if you go a bit to the right, you find conservatives, right? So here in Canada, we have a conservative party. They're, a little bit on the right, right? Little right wing. If you go to the left, you'll see more liberal parties, right? So our Liberal Party is there. Our New Democratic Party is over there as well. The Green Party is kind of over there. So in most countries, you have people leaning a little bit left or a little bit right, right? If you go all the way left to the extreme, you'll basically run into communism, right? So communism is extremely left-wing in terms of its political and economic views. If you go all the way to the right, you'll find fascism. Okay, so fascists like the Nazis and Benito Mussolini's fascists, those guys are way out on the right side. Okay, so here we see the radical right are people who are leaning toward that kind of area, right, in terms of their social and political ideas, right? So again, most major political parties stay really close to the center because most people are reasonable, normal people, and so they're a little bit left or a little bit right, but most people are in the center. But this radical right are people who are kind of leaning further out, right? Their views are a little more extreme. And frighteningly, we see this happening in the US in the Republican Party, where the Republicans, are starting to lean much further to the right than they used to, right? And probably the Democrats as well, right? If you're keeping up with US politics and you know people like Bernie Sanders, or if you know AOC, right, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, those two and others are kind of leaning further left than the Democratic Party usually has, right? Bernie Sanders is talking about kind of socialist ideas, really. And so we're kind of seeing a polarization in the US where people are leaning a little further, toward the edges. Again, nobody's looking for communism or fascism, but people are leaning out a little bit. But these guys on the alt-right are, further right than the Republicans. They're kind of drifting out towards fascism. What kind of things do they believe in? That their race is superior, right? Which we're not. Have you ever seen us dance? Horrible. Sorry. They think that the white race is superior, that their race is superior. What else do they believe? Yeah, so they're anti-Semitic, right? They have a prejudice against Jewish people, right? And we see ideas of this kind of Jewish conspiracy, right? This idea that somehow, Jews are secretly in control of the world, right? And this is an idea that comes up every now and again. Hitler used it to great effect. Of course, there's no truth to it at all, right? But it's a popular conspiracy theory that makes people afraid, right? What else do they believe? What's that? Right. So at the very least, they want white people and non-white people to be separated, to be segregated, but they really don't want them in the country at all, right? They should be subordinated or subjugated, so they should be at the bottom of society, or they should be kicked out or eliminated, right? In extreme views, right? What else do they believe? What else do they believe?
What the religion like they believe that Christianity is like a form of
Br- Yeah, so there's lots of there's a certain amount of Christianity woven into the ideas of some of these guys, right? And again, it's kind of I don't want to say a weird Christianity, but it's not sort of your typical. It's not a typical sort of Catholic or Protestant or Baptist or evangelical kind of thing. It's mixed with a healthy dose of kind of racism and heterosexism and misogyny, right? So it's a weird mix. You look like you had a question. Didn't? No. Okay. I could see it in your eyes. No. Anything else that these guys believe in?
The abortion of white babies threatens the survival of the white race.
Right. So many Christians are not in favor or not supportive of abortion or the ability to get an abortion in the United States. Again, that's a complicated topic. It has a religious basis to it, right? Because Christians, of course, believe that the life is created by God and that you're not allowed to take that life, right? You're not allowed to end it on your own. But here, there's kind of a racial element to it as well, right? Is that an abortion of a white baby means that there are fewer white people, right? And these guys already think that they're under attack. I say guys, I mean to be gender inclusive here, but to be honest, it is mostly men that are a part of these organizations. Some women, but mostly men. Yeah, so I guess this is kind of leading into question 4, right? But the views around abortion are complicated, right? Because there's a religious aspect to it. There's a racial aspect to it, at least for these people, right? What other kind of ideas are involved in terms of abortion? What else kind of influences how people think about it? What influences how you think about abortion? Your religion, sure. In this case, your race or ethnicity, right? Maybe not for everyone, but for these people, yes. What else influences your feelings about that, do you think? I'll give you a hint. Gender! Sorry. Too much of a hint. Gender is important as well, right? Because, of course, pregnancy for the most part happens to women, right? And so sometimes women tend to have very different ideas about it than men, right? And often in the United States, or right now in the United States, you see numerous states passing laws to make abortion more difficult to get. And again, most of those lawmakers are men, right? Attempting to control the bodies or activities of women. And again, we could get into that. Actually, that would be a good presentation topic. Is the abortion issue in the United States? That'd be very interesting. But anyway, that's an aside. Okay, let's take a pause right there. We'll take a little break. When we come back, we'll do a little more project work. Okay, so we'll press pause on white supremacy because we can really only take so much of it. It's a bit much. And we'll come back and we'll do some project work, okay? All right, break time. So, okay, sorry about that, everyone. We are back. Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to put a pause on this, and I just want to talk to you very quickly about. We talked about sources yesterday. Yes, we did that. Okay, so I just want to talk very quickly about plagiarism, because you're going to be in your presentation, you're going to be pulling information from elsewhere, and you're going to be putting it into a document of your own, right? And when you do that, you want to make sure you don't plagiarize, because plagiarism is the cardinal sin of the academic world, right? If you can get away with a lot of stuff at university, but you can't get away with plagiarism, right? And again, academic honesty is basically what academics are built on, right? We can't kind of learn anything new, and we can't develop any new technologies unless everybody shares what they discover, right? And in order to encourage people to share, we credit them, right? We give them credit. And so that's kind of why we cite our sources in the first place, right? It's just like it's just like on Instagram when you've got a picture and you tag your friends in it. Does anyone tag their friends in their Instagram pictures? Do you just not take pictures of your friends? If you tag your friends or whatever, that's kind of what you're doing when you're citing your sources, right? You're tagging your information and saying, hey, this piece of information came from this person. Thank you very much, right? You're just giving them a little thanks, a little shout out, a little tag, right? Just to acknowledge their contribution. And so that's why we cite sources, but when we use other people's words or ideas, we have to make sure we don't plagiarize, right? We don't want to pass their work off as our own, right? And so I'm just going to give you some tips in order to not do that, okay? So again, we have to figure out how to treat people's words and ideas and how to cite them, okay? So first, if you're going to use other people's information or arguments or ideas or words themselves, you can incorporate them into your writing by paraphrasing or by quoting them, okay? Now, what I would say to you is try not to quote anything at all, okay? Or try not to put anything in quotes. For the most part, it doesn't really help your writing, right? Or so it's not really going to help your presentation either. The only place that quotes really work is where you need to hear people's exact words, right? So you all know who George Floyd is, right? The black man who was murdered by a police officer a couple years ago now, I think. The last thing he said, or the thing he was saying while he was being suffocated with that knee on his neck was, "I can't breathe," right? And that's kind of a very powerful statement, right? You wouldn't want to paraphrase that, right? You wouldn't want to say, "Oh, and then George Floyd was, indicating to the officer that he was having trouble, getting air into his lungs," right? That's not the same, right? Like, it doesn't, you need the words, right? You need, "I can't breathe," right? You need those actual words to get the force of it, right? But there's lots of cases where you don't need that, right? And so I find most of the time when students quote, it just kind of takes away from their own writing. And so I would encourage you not to do it unless you need to hear someone's words, right? Like right from their mouth kind of thing. If you don't need that, I would paraphrase everything, okay? So when you paraphrase something, basically you say it in your own words, right? So you take somebody's idea or you take what somebody's written and you summarize it in your own words, okay? Let me give you an example. So here's two short little sections of writing. One is the original thing that you might read from a source, okay? And the other one is a paraphrase. So this is a good little kind of summary, right? So I'm not going to read it out loud. Oh, no, I am going to read it out loud. So students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes, and as a result, they overuse quotations in the final paper. Probably only about 10% of your final manuscript should appear as directly quoted matter. I would say less, but that's okay. Therefore, you should strive to limit the amount of exact transcribing of source materials while taking notes. Okay, so that comes from a book, and here's the source, right? Lester James D. Writing Research Papers, 2nd edition, 1976. Okay, so that's where the material comes from. And here's the paraphrase. In research papers, students often quote excessively, failing to keep quoted material down to a desirable level. Since the problem usually originates during note-taking, it is essential to minimize the material recorded verbatim. Right? So here they've communicated the same thing, but they've communicated it a little shorter, and they haven't reused James Lester's words. Right? They've kind of said it in their own way, right, in their own terms. And that's what you want to do. And see at the end, there we have Lester, 4647, right? So that's our little tag. That's our little, thanks James Lester, right? That's your stuff. Thank you very much. And again, it's perfectly acceptable to use other people's stuff, right? If we go back to, I won't go back to it, but if you look at the Shavella-Pittman article that we read a couple days ago, you'll see lots of names in brackets, right? Did you not? Yeah, all of those are sources, right? That's not Shavella-Pittman's stuff, that's other people's stuff. And she's citing them all, right? She's giving them all a little thank you very much. Yeah, so that's good. That's what we want to do. We can make it even shorter as well. So the top part is the same thing. The bottom here, students should just take a few notes in direct quotation from sources to minimize the amount of quoted material in a research paper. Great. That's what he was saying too, just in a nice small package, right? Perfect. Now, here's what we don't want to do. So have a look at this one. I won't read it out loud, but compare one to the other, right? Can you see what they've done here? Yeah. Yeah, they kind of pulled out their thesaurus, right? And they just swapped a few words, right? Students frequently overuse, students often use too many, right? Direct quotations, in taking notes, when they take notes. As a result, they overuse quotations, resulting in too many of them in the final research paper, right? So, too close, right? They've, like Kang says, they've used a few synonyms, you know, they've pulled out the thesaurus, but that doesn't count, right? This is the same thing, right? So you've got to read something, think about it, and then put it into your own words, right? That's the trick to this. And again, note that in the plagiarized version, there's no citation at the end, right? So now, you know, it's definitely plagiarism. If the citation was there, like on the last one, if the citation was there, I would say, oh, you know, maybe it's not plagiarism, maybe it's just bad paraphrasing, right? Which is possible. But if you don't cite it at all, then, you know, you're kind of pretending that this is your work. And it's not your work, it's James Lester's work, right? So again, the trick here is going to be to say things in your own words and, you know, and summarize them without saying exactly the same thing. Yeah, if you quote something, you use the exact words from the source, right? So you don't get to, you know, you don't get to borrow things or take things out or add things in usually. Well, there are ways to do that, but for the most part, you're using the exact quote, right? So here we have the exact words of one of our prime ministers, Sir Wilfrid Laurier. As I said, I would stay away from direct quotes. They usually don't help you out. And again, I want to hear your words, right? I want to hear your thoughts. I don't want to hear Wilfrid Laurier's. I don't care about that guy, right? I want to hear what you say. But again, there may be the odd time, like, you know, with George Floyd, where I can't breathe is necessary, right? You need to hear those words. You don't want to paraphrase that. You want to put that in there, right? So, yeah, so try not to quote it all. If you need to quote, it has to be exact words, okay? Now to cite things, actually let me just pull that up here. So yeah, do I have that open yet still? Oh, okay, well I got this open. This will work. No, it won't. No, it won't. Hang on one second. So, for citations, there's a couple of places you can look to find the correct formatting. I usually go to OWL Purdue, and I think I've got the link in the assignment, so you can go there to find how to cite your sources. You can see here, nope, that's not right. You can see here, yeah, so if we look at our article here from Shavella Pittman, and we can see that she has cited her sources in a couple places, right? So here we can see it show up in the text itself, right? So here she says, for example, oppressive classroom environment for women and students has been discussed by Free Air 1970, has been demonstrated by researchers such as. So she's kind of citing all of these different sources, right? And so that's an in-text citation, so you do that in the text. And then at the end, you will find all of these show up, right? So if I'm curious about Aston here, I'm going to, okay, we know it's there. There it is. So I go to the end of her paper and I find that she has cited her source at the end in kind of a works cited thing, right? So we've got the author, we've got the year, we've got the title of the thing, and then we've got a publisher, right? So this looks like it was a book, right? What Matters in College, 4 Critical Years Revisited. That looks to be a book, right? But if we look here, if we look at the next one, this looks to be a journal article, right? So we've got the authors there, Phyllis Baker and Martha Kopp. We've got the year, and then we've got the title, Gender Matters Most, Interaction of Gendered Expectations, blah, 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 blah. And then there's that italics, right? So that's the journal title, right? So the title of this journal is called Teaching Sociology. And it's probably issue 25, number 1, and then the page numbers. And so if you go to a site like, let me see. Yeah, so if you go to that OWL Purdue site, and if we look at MLA, there we go. If we go there, we'll find that this will teach us how to do our citations, right? So you can see here, they'll show you how to do it, right? So if you have how to format the author, how to format the title, pardon me, how to format the container, right? So what the piece of writing is in, right? If it's not a book on its own, if it's in a journal or a magazine or something like that. And so they'll kind of teach you how to do this, right? And so there's a few tricky ones. Maybe I'll leave that out for now. But a site like this will kind of teach you the correct formatting, right? And for the most part, you guys will be, hang on, there we go. For the most part, you guys will be looking at periodicals, so things that comes from magazines or newspapers, right? And so you'll have citations that look something like this, or you'll have things from electronic sources, right? And so they'll show you how to kind of format that as well. Keep in mind with electronic sources, you'll see that it has accessed on. That's important because websites change, right? So we want to know when you looked at that website, just in case it changes later, right? Because websites do. Formatting these sources is a royal pain in the butt, I will tell you. Nobody likes doing it, but you have to do it, right? When I wrote my master's thesis, it took me, oh God, I'm sure there was 2 weeks of formatting at least at the end. So all of the sources and the citations and the graphs and the charts, and so it's a pain. Nobody likes to do it, but we have to learn to do it properly. Okay, so I'll kind of leave that with you. What I would like to do is, I would like to pause there. I would like to leave the rest of the class for you to work on figuring out your topic, and you can ask me questions if you want. I said it was supposed to be due today, but I think I'm going to make it due tomorrow because I probably should have left us a little more time to do that, okay? So tomorrow we will settle on our presentation topics. Maybe we can work through a citation example tomorrow just to try it out. And then we should be good, okay? So can I give you the rest of the time to work on your topic? Okay. So that's what we'll do. But tomorrow I want to know what it is. I want to know what it is, and I want to know who you're working with, if anybody. Okay? All right. Go to it, people. that's about all the time we have for today, so I'll let you pack it up. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll give you a little bit more time to work on this tomorrow, and then we'll carry on, okay? All right, that's it. See you tomorrow.